community meeting in Scotland in conjunction with our exchange here at IXScotland. I guess I should start by thanking the university for providing facilities again. We continue to be grateful for the support the university gives to us. There is a wireless service available, so if you've got laptops or tablets or smartphones. The AP to look out for is KeySurf, and I'm told it's passwordless and challengeless, so you can just get on it. Those of you, who's been to a Links meeting before? See a show of hands? Quite a few, so you'll know the ropes. So I'm going to try and be short and not boring today. We're doing something a little bit experimental. I think this is the second time we've done it. We've got a Google Hangout running for people who want to see what's going on who couldn't make it here physically. We tried this when we held a community meeting in North America earlier this year, and we were quite surprised to find that something like a third of the audience was watching us remotely rather than physically in the room, so you never know these days. We've got quite an interesting lineup of presentations, and the meat of today is a panel session. So I'd just like to briefly thank the various people who have helped us put that together. Colin Cook's going to come and speak in a moment and just give us a proper welcome. I'm very grateful to Michael Foreman for agreeing to do the keynote presentation. He's going to challenge us. Charlie and I are going to talk about the vision for IXScotland and how we might achieve it. We've got a couple of sponsors. We're very grateful to Imtech and Paulson for sponsoring the event, and they're going to speak briefly before we take a break. And then we've got something that we had originally thought, but some brief talks on community broadband initiatives just tee us up for really what the meat of today is, and that's the panel session. So I'd like to thank Richard and Roel for organising that, and for the people who've agreed to be part of the panel. And then I'm going to give you a very, very brief update on Links. I'll try and be as short as I can, and then we'll try and see what's emerged from today's discussions and try and draw the threads together. And then we've got a social event arranged for afterwards. We're going to provide the transport over to there. We'll make another announcement about that later on. So without further ado, could I invite Colin to come and kick us off?
Yes, delighted to welcome. Can I check? I mean, it's maybe on Google Hangout, but are you videoing this? Yes. Oh, here we go.
We can turn it off if you want.
Well, no, but I mean, I was lucky enough to do the introduction back in March last year when we first sort of spoke about this at Heriot Watt, and all I was asked to do, like today, was to stand up and say thank you. So I stood up and said welcome, made some bad joke about the Scottish weather, and thought nothing of it until it's about the only video evidence of me on the internet. And my poor parents, who think I do a useful job, now went on to watch it, and all they saw was some joke that fell flat about the Scottish weather, and me saying hello and welcome. And I was really concerned this was going to happen again, and whether I should, start talking a little bit more in depth about the Internet Exchange for Scotland. So, okay, well, hopefully you'll decide that the welcome is not worthy of broadcast. I think that's probably the best way of going. Welcome. Really pleased. So it's been over a year and a half since I was lucky enough to talk to you in Heriot Watt, and a year plus since we launched the Internet Exchange. And Scottish Government continues to see this as part of the overall infrastructure that we need for a world-class digital Scotland. And that's our very, very strong commitment. And of course, part of that infrastructure is physical infrastructure. It's around digital infrastructure, the things that we're going to talk about later in terms of our super-fast broadband network, our community programs, the efforts that we'll make on mobile infrastructure as well. We've always been clear that there are other elements of that infrastructure that we need to invest in. And this is one, and obviously things like trying to facilitate and encourage people to use the .scot domain is another one of the things we think are part of an overall perception of Scotland as being a world-class digital country. So we're very keen to see this program, this project succeed in Scotland. Now, we've never seen it as government. We're going to talk about what government's role is in this later on. We've never seen it as government's responsibility to ensure that this is a success, to drive the project and the program. But we do see it as government's responsibility to try and bring people together and to facilitate that success, because we're absolutely committed to making it a success. I think we did that, hopefully, right from the very beginning. The work of Clive and Ivan and others to help this happen. And we want to continue to do that. And I really look forward to the discussions later on to see if there are other ideas and new ideas about what more we can do to facilitate this and make it a success. Because I'm very, very clear that there are other similar programs in the marketplace. Looked at the success that the Welsh equivalent has enjoyed. And we've got to make sure that in Scotland we do everything as a government to make this a huge success. So that's our commitment, and I hope we'll deliver on it. Thank you for coming today. There are a couple of members of the sort of Team Scotland that work on improving connectivity across the country later on the panel session, and I hope they're going to have some really interesting comments to make. But really and truly, I am certainly here to learn more about what we can do and what's happening, and I just welcome you to the event, so good luck. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Michael Foreman. This has been moved from a Mac to PowerPoint, and therefore it's no longer aligned, and we'll see more of that. At least it gives me an excuse for the mistakes I will have deliberately left at 3 in the morning when I was working on this. Okay, trombones or bagpipes, and I'll explain that later. This diagram comes from a paper by Analysis Mason of what it means to have an IXP, and from a computer scientist's point of view, it's a complete no-brainer. If you want to connect n things to n things, and you just let them do it individually, you've got n squared things to connect. And if you put one node in the middle and connect via there, it makes life easier for everybody. Okay. But what I want to do is to go back on the reasons for this in a slightly broader context. So this is not going to show either because the colors go wrong when you do this. This says, why is the internet expensive in Africa? Reliant on transit, lack of content, lack of interconnectivity. There are many places in Scotland, we were just talking about it, where it's expensive as a small WISP ISP to access the internet. Why? Exactly the same reasons. This happens at every scale. It's the same reasons why it's expensive. It may be that they have much less infrastructure, it's much worse there, but I really think fundamentally the reasons are the same. Remote places, fewer people invest, and those that do invest have monopolies. This is from the Internet Society. I think there may be some people here who know even less than I do about this, so I thought it was worth putting it up, but most of you know much, much more than I do. So quickly, it's a place where different IP networks meet to exchange traffic. And in order to make the internet work, networks need to exchange traffic, and as I just said, the efficient way to do that is if there are more than 2 of you, it's good to have an exchange where you do that. Keeping local traffic local, it enables you, instead of going down to London with your traffic every time you want to talk to your neighbour and then back up to Scotland again to talk locally. It builds community, because it means you get skills developing locally. It improves the quality of services because you don't have the latency of going down to London and back. And it attracts other kinds of infrastructure. So it's a catalyst for development. I think that's why the Scottish Government thinks that this is part of their strategy. Just a picture, better latency to neighbouring networks, improved resilience to neighbouring networks, reduced bandwidth bottlenecks, and lower transit costs. And that would work with just 2 networks connecting, but if there are more, you want to do more than that. And then, from my perspective, not from the network engineer's perspective, it's really simple, because once they've done all their work and set this thing up, then all they have to do to connect 2 networks is plug them together, because they're in the same place, and it's very cheap, and it's very easy. I think that's from Amsterdam, but it could just as well be in Scotland. Okay. So now stepping back from the technology, point is that information is what society runs on. And here's a paper about high-speed internet and the demand for local services. It's actually a paper about libraries, and when the internet comes somewhere, Do people stop using libraries? And the answer is, no, they don't. They actually make more efficient use of libraries because the internet enables them to search the content in ways that they couldn't do before, and they actually use the internet more. So the internet changes the way in which we access information. And you get this thing called knowledge spillover, which is a concept that if you learn to do something to do your job and somebody else sees that you're doing that, they learn as well, and the economy is more efficient because people learn from each other. When you have the internet, people learn from each other. You get greater knowledge flows and you get an increase in human capital. Your workforce becomes more highly educated. We'll talk about making that happen soon. And skilled. They can communicate better, and fundamentally, you end up with higher economic productivity and higher earnings. So we all want the internet, and if we do it locally, we can amplify those effects. This is again from the Analysis Mason paper. There are direct and indirect benefits. You improve the cost and performance of your network, but those things flow through into higher uptake, more investment in services that need better network performance, and investments in the IXP itself. So you get all these indirect economic benefits. Similarly, from the where's this from? This is from a paper given by someone called Bruff Turner earlier this year on the impact of internet peering on network architectures and economics. So he's talking about America. A regional ISP in mid-state Illinois will have limited options for any kind of internet transit and no local options for peering. Fiber connections from the incumbent telephone company are widely available but expensive. Competing local fiber is rare, while long-haul fiber routes have relatively few physical access points. And outside of major cities, the rates for internet transit service can be 10 to 100 times greater than at a neutral data center in a major hub like Chicago. So we see that already. If you go as far as East Lothian, the price can be significantly more for your transit. And we can just translate all of that to rural Scotland and say the same things are happening in rural Scotland. Going on, he says, well, the options for that person would be locally purchased transit or transport to Chicago. Read London until recently, but now read Edinburgh, plus internet transit purchased in Chicago. And then the benefits are that we can build up a whole cluster economy. So ultimately, we should be able to peer. You should be able to offload some of your traffic because once you've got those content providers into the exchange, then all the videos you're watching don't have to come from London, they only have to come from Edinburgh. Reduces the bills, and these principles apply at every scale. It's already useful to peer between two small networks on the West Coast because there are local services that they can provide, like talking to each other, which don't have to even come to Edinburgh. So these principles should be part of the internet culture in a proper digital Scotland. Okay. So if you look in London or on the backbone, then strong competition, people complain about it a lot. There's no profit in this because it's just the marginal costs. But there is some profit because people are still doing it. It's just you can't make monopoly profits in it where there's competition. But access networks in the US and many countries are monopolies or duopolies under dramatically less competitive pressure. That's also true here. There are some remedies from Ofcom, but some would argue they're insufficient to reduce all of the distortions. And they're also true, certainly in Scotland, of the middle mile network as well. That there's no competition, so when you're a long way away, it gets more expensive. Okay. So this is from the IXP toolkit. IXPs where different networks can exchange local traffically are ideally needed in every city. There's a variety of local constraints and initiating and I think delivering, but I can't remember the word, is not as simple as it would appear. I do apologize for the lost in translation stuff here. So what's happening in Scotland? So these are questions to everyone here, in particular to Colin. Where's Colin gone? And his team. This is a picture of not all of Scotland's connectivity. I'll show you another picture of other bits. There isn't one published map to show us where Scotland's fibre lies, because that's commercial in confidence information. So you have to find people who glean bits of it, and publish bits of it, or occasionally bits of it that get published in not very detailed form by, for instance, the Scottish government, but you can't find one single map. So these are some of the fibres in Scotland. Do Scotland's businesses and communities have affordable access to Scotland's connectivity? So Will may be able to tell us later about the problems of getting a circuit from here to here. There's international connectivity coming in the north of Scotland, but very little, if any, of our traffic goes that way to the internet. It all goes down to London and out the other end. One opportunity that I was raising earlier with John was the possibility that if we could get that connection to IXScotland, then maybe there'd be a market for a new kind of service of people who wanted to access the North American internet by Iceland rather than by London and Amsterdam or Ireland. Question for the Scottish government: how will Swan be connected? Is Swan going to act as a anchor tenant within the exchange so that other people, content providers, will be motivated to come there because they'll get connections to all the schools and hospitals and local councils in Scotland? It might help if they did. And then one thing you always have to ask when you're looking at this stuff is there competition, or is there a single player with monopoly power over certain of the infrastructure? And if so, what should policy be doing about it? Okay. So next bit, I want to congratulate the Scottish government at this point, because this is a picture of essentially of BT's fibre, if I understand properly, at the moment or last year. And right now, these blue bits have been going in. I don't know exactly how far they've got, but they should have been doing the subsea crossings over the summer. And so I hope plenty of them are in by now. That's what the step change program is meant to be delivering in terms of fibre connectivity. But there really is a question of how will we be able to access it? How will the WISPs be able to access this? How will small businesses who want to do something very innovative out on the West Coast be able to access it? Will it be as easy as accessing the internet in London or Edinburgh? Okay, so the benefits: you're keeping traffic local, developing local infrastructure. This is again from the Internet Society. Interesting that they have to remind government about this. And it's also interesting in a UK context, when about, let's see, it was in about 2009, I spoke with Simon Cowler, who is one of the civil servants down in London dealing with internet policy, and was saying it really doesn't make sense that there's no internet exchange in Scotland. All my traffic from me to my place of work goes via London all the time. It's crazy. His response was, GCHQ wouldn't like that. That was in 2009, well before Snowden. So we have to be aware of those kinds of pressures being around as well, and make sure that we're not getting stymied, which may sometimes happen, for reasons we haven't even thought about. So I just thought I'd point that out. Oh, I'm going very, very fast. Okay, it doesn't matter because we have lots to do today. So what I want to do now is to give you a few more questions to the government. Would you like trombones or bagpipes? So the trombone has this long, sending things all the way down the tube to come all the way back again. And the word tromboning is a word for this phenomenon that you see all over the internet, where the traffic goes to some remote center and then comes back. It used to be, when the academic networks were first going commercial, that traffic from the UK to the UK would go via America for exactly the same reason. We don't do that anymore because we now have a developed internet ecosystem within Europe, so traffic from Europe to Europe stays in Europe. If you're in Africa now, you find your traffic goes via Europe, often just to go to a neighboring country or even elsewhere in your own country. But there's no reason why traffic from Scotland should have to go all the way down to London and back. So keeping your wind all in one place is a good idea. So questions to government: have you removed the bottlenecks to investment, or are there still bottlenecks? And questions for everybody else: tell us about any bottlenecks so we can tell the government. What can government do to promote a competitive environment for IXScotland? And this one's a heartfelt one, because well, I'd love to think the answer is yes. Have you taken a look? No, I'm sure the answer is yes, you've taken a look. Have you taken a look at terrestrial fibre costs in Scotland? And what can you do to lower these costs? And the question is, how can we ensure that when we've got this wonderful infrastructure, then it really does do the job that we wanted it to do when the investment was made? That is, to make it possible to do anything on the internet anywhere in Scotland. IXScotland's a part of that, but it's not the whole answer. So that's what I had to say. I've gone fast, as I said. This is the agenda. So we're about to have the vision for IXScotland. Thanks very much indeed. Happy to take questions.
Are there any questions for Michael? Don't be shy.
Maybe later.
Mine's not a question, just to tell me a simple company that my name is Sarah Barge. I'm the Programme Director for Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband, and I'll be delighted to give some updates when I take my place on the panel.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Michael, for setting the scene. It's very tempting in these situations to go all over again, sort of why we're here, but I'm kind of taking it for granted that we've done that, and that Michael's reminded us of why what we're doing is important. In 1994, when Links was founded, you had the irony that people who lived on opposite sides of a road could pretty much guarantee, if they sent each other an email, that it would go by North Virginia before it would cross the road, and that's clearly absurd. And so Links was founded to keep traffic local. That was a sort of mantra that we used to say to ourselves. And I think the reason why we're in this room today is that the granularity of local in that mantra has changed, and that we see now that keeping it local, as in let's push it all through London, isn't necessarily a very good idea. Sad to say, I think the UK is horribly London-centric. I found myself saying in a different context a week or so ago, it's all the Romans' fault. In fact, if you look at a map and you look and see what the Romans did in terms of building road infrastructure in the UK, they made something that looked beautifully geometric to them. All the roads spiraled out of London, and we still use some of those roads today. Things like the A5 and so on, still going strong on the Watling Street that the Romans built. And right up to today, in the 21st century, network operators are busily building networks that are completely dependent upon London. It's an irony that, and I don't want to start this with scare stories, but it's an irony that almost all that infrastructure, or the key infrastructure, is in the Docklands, very, very close to the Thames Barrier. And I think when the Thames Barrier was built, it was assumed to have an operational life of about 20 years. And we're past that already, and no one's actually seeing what happens next. So the context of what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the vision for IXScotland. And an obvious question to ask is why have a vision statement at all? And those who were at that first meeting will remember that I said I didn't think there was any point in Links building IXScotland unless it was something that was actually wanted locally. If there wasn't going to be a local community of interest, that was our key touchstone for building regional exchanges, then we wouldn't do it. And indeed, it's nicely reinforcing, because Links is a membership organisation, and it's the membership ultimately that decides what we do, and that the membership is a community. If that community can't be convinced that there's value in building a regional exchange like IXScotland, then it simply won't happen. I think there are a few copies of the strategy paper that we produced that underpins all this outside in the reception area. So if you've never seen that document, if you'd like to take a look, it's available online and you can pick up a physical copy there. I had one of those classic moments when I realised that links may be inhibiting peering in the UK, and born out of that thought was that we could take our original mantra of keeping traffic local and extend that notion of locality to something that was much more local in the UK, in either the regions or municipalities or countries of the UK. I did wonder with the referendum happening this year whether the nature and tone of this discussion was going to be a little different, and we were prepared either way. I think the general principle still stands. So what you're actually going to see next is a pair of presentations, one by me, because the steering committee, the local steering committee for IXScotland actually asked me to draft this. There was some risks in that because, again, this was someone from the centre doing it rather than someone from within Scotland. But you're going to get a matching presentation from Charlie Russo, who's the local steering committee chairman, on trying to put this vision into practice. And actually, my bit's the easy bit. Having a vision and being inspired is actually comparatively easy compared with a much more difficult task of implementing it. And that's something that where I feel that Links has got the obligation to support the local steering committee to make it happen. So the vision itself is actually really nice and simple. Some might say too simplistic. You'll see that we went for a fives metaphor in here, which I'll return to. So from where we sat, when we put this together, we thought having 50 networks connected to the exchange would feel pretty good. I make the side observation that there needs to be a balance of access and content. I think in the very early days of building internet exchanges, people just discount networks and think, well, when we've got enough of them, it'll all be fine. But these days, of course, it's not like that at all. There's a big skew between how access works and how content provision works, and we need to pay attention to that. I'll come back to that point. We had an aspiration of having 50 gig per second of peak traffic. Some people thought we were rather bonkers with that number, but it seems to me that you have to have an aspiration. And then we come on to one of the trickiest bits of all, something I think we've left unresolved from when we met nearly 18 months ago, and that's where is it to be? It's still not at all obvious to me how we're going to solve that one. We started in the obvious place. Paulson's data centre in South Kyle was reported to be roughly 50% of the colocation neutral space in Scotland. So if you can't make it work there, then you really are up against it. But what happens when you start to branch out from that? And again, I'll try and address that in what I say. And we had the aspiration that we'll try and achieve all this within 5 years. It seemed to me that was probably the easiest and lamest bit of the whole vision because it's an arbitrary point in the future and it really doesn't bear any relation to anything other than if you don't put something like that down, then where are you going with it and how do you judge success? So that was the vision. As I said, it's nice and simple. Why have that vision? Well, I mean, to state the obvious, you need to start somewhere. And it seemed to me that if we couldn't shoot comparatively high, then we probably won't do our job properly. We have the benefit that we can actually look around the European scene and see what happens elsewhere and see if there are any models there that enable us to get a firmer handle on this and whether this aspiration is correct or not. And I can make a sort of small announcement today. Curtis Lindqvist, who is my opposite number in the NetNod, which is a very big exchange in Sweden and now also Denmark. We must have been smoking or drinking too much, but at a recent NetNod meeting, we decided we would launch a small research project of our own. And we're about to try and get down into a document, some stuff that's been buzzing around our heads for a long time, about how the internet exchange scene works in Europe, where we're the two of us personally most familiar. And that has already started me thinking about what happens in second cities in European countries and whether or not there is something to be gleaned from that would help us here in Scotland. Now, I'm not arguing that Edinburgh is in some sense the UK's second city, but there are some analogies there that seems to me that are relevant. The second city bit is important because just like the UK, lots of other European countries have got their internet exchanges concentrated in their capital city, and they're probably having meetings just like this saying, isn't it miserable that everything goes through Paris and you can't get any decent connectivity for out in the wilds of France. Every country to some extent feels disadvantaged, and we're going to provide some context for that, which again I hope will help us here, and if you're interested in that research then talk to me afterwards. What we know though is that there's a clear demand to keep content local. Later today I'm going to briefly touch across some other areas of Lynx's activity at the moment, and we're just starting an exchange in Cardiff, as Colin mentioned, and issues of language, for example, are one reason why there is a desire to keep traffic local. It seems utterly absurd that where you've got language TV channels, for example, that all that content is being, all that streaming content is being served so far away from where the natural consumers of that content are trying to receive it. So we're pretty clear that there is a demand to keep traffic local, and therefore the notion of an exchange is something that's wanted, and I think Michael's made the case for that, and I don't need to repeat it all. So, and as I said, the fives gave us a sort of hook to enable us to easily remember this set of aspirations, and therefore to have some sort of concentration on to putting them into practice. So the obvious question is, where's the demand? Lynx is not in the business of going clobbing networks over the head and dragging, screaming and kicking to an exchange. That doesn't work. Indeed, the whole nature of peering is a voluntary activity. And even when you've got a huge meshed exchange, as we have in London with more than 550 networks connected, there is some sparseness in that mesh because we don't force networks to peer with each other. However, if the advantages of peering are so overwhelming, then in general people will. So we've got some chicken and eggs to sort out here, because if there is, given the voluntary nature of peering and the fact that people will need to want to do it, that implicit in that is that they've got to do things like build a business case. And if we can't show them that we can offer advantages to that business case building, then it's going to be difficult for them. And the reason it's chicken and eggs as well is that although there are usually in life first mover advantages, in some cases here there are first mover disadvantages. You might sit there lonely with your connection, waiting for the matching, if you're an access provider, waiting for sufficient content providers to show up in order to exchange packets with them. And so selling the vision is one of the things that we've clearly got to do. However, to do that, I think you've really got to persuade yourself that there is sufficient demand and that you can get there. So what I'm going to try and do in the next few slides is to show you that there should be sufficient demand to build that vision. So the obvious thing to do is break it down. Actually look at the component parts, look at the different types of networks that there may be. And I started off by saying, well, let's just think purely about Scottish networks that exist purely in Scotland. And they themselves, of course, are going to break down into at least two subgroups. As the slide illustrates, there's a bunch of people who still have aspirations to be access providers, and then there are content providers. Speaking generally about the UK, it seems to me that we've had our bubble. We had a massive number of ISPs at one point. No one really knew how many, but sadly that's gone. The bubble's burst, and we've seen a lot of aggregation now. So there are a lot less people aspiring to be access providers. Indeed, something like 90% of the UK market is served by just 4 large access providers, certainly in the consumer space. But it's clear that there are still a number of itinerant access